Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I would start this week. The first kicker, Cam Little of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Cam Little, we know he has unlimited range. Hit a 70-yarder in preseason, a 68-yarder at the Vegas Raiders in Week 9. In the last couple weeks, 2 out of 3 weeks, double-digit fantasy points. So this week, a great matchup versus the New York Jets. Give up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And like I said, Cam Little is in an offense that's putting points on the board and has a great matchup this week versus the Jets. So the last few weeks, Week 11 versus the Chargers, 5. Week 12 at the Cardinals, 13. Week 13 at the Titans, 6. And Week 14 versus the Colts, 11 fantasy points. So this week with a great matchup versus a Jet defense that can't stop anyone. We just saw a Miami Dolphin team where in cold weather they can't get anything going, go out there and put up fantasy points. I think this week Cam Little, he could go out there and put up fantasy points easily in this one versus a Jet defense that can't stop anyone. And he's a start this week. The next kicker, Jake Bates of the Detroit Lions. Bates, a big game last week in the big victory versus the Dallas Cowboys. And this week a good matchup at the Rams where they're bend but don't break defense. And it's an indoor game as well at SoFi Stadium where, that's always a plus for a kicker. So the last few weeks here for Bates, Week 11 in Philadelphia, 3. Week 12 versus the Giants, 12. Week 13 versus Green Bay, 6. And Week 14 versus the Cowboys, 16 fantasy points. So Bates, obviously there's going to be times he's only going to get a lot of extra point opportunities, but when he gets chances to get 3 or 4 field goals, we've seen it obviously last week versus the Cowboys. We had 16, so this week I think Bates, he could go out there and be a nice starting option for fantasy owners. Once again, next kicker, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Boswell, he got back to putting up some decent numbers in last week's game. We had 2 weeks in a row. He didn't do much. Week 11 versus Cincinnati, 10. Week 12 at Chicago Bears, 4. Week 13 versus the Bills, 1. And Week 14 at the Ravens, 9 fantasy points. So this week a good matchup. Monday Night Football, Miami coming in. Their defense has been middle of the pack over the last few weeks. Give up the 18th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And we know Boswell from 50-plus has been one of the more accurate kickers of all time. So I think this week, Pittsburgh, they're going to get in the red zone a decent amount in this ball game. We know Boswell has a big boot, even in cold and bad weather in Pittsburgh, especially on a Monday night in December. But I think Boswell this week, once again, is a good start for fantasy owners. Next kicker, Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Chase McLaughlin, we know he has a big boot. We know he's been a better kicker at home than he's been on the road. And rightfully so. When you play in hot Tampa, you're going to get good opportunities. I know last week was rainy and the field was ripping up and all wet. What a decent ball game was Chase McLaughlin. So the last few weeks, Week 12 at the Rams, 1. Week 13 versus Arizona, 10. And Week 14 versus the Saints, 9 fantasy points. So Week 15, Atlanta coming in this week here. Give up the 14th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Chase McLaughlin, he's another kicker that has a big boot. So this is a Thursday night game. These ball games are usually more high scoring than obviously Sunday games for whatever reason. Teams don't prepare and offenses have more of an advantage. And Chase McLaughlin, like I said, at home, he's been a great kicker all season long, more than on the road. And we know this Falcon team can't stop anyone. So this week, McLaughlin's a start. And the final kicker, Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys. Last week, he went out there and he made it look easy in that ball game, hitting 3 long balls in that ball game, a couple 60-plus yarders in that one for the Dallas Cowboys. And the last few weeks, Week 11 at Vegas, 9. Week 12 versus Philly, 7. Week 13 versus Kansas City, 12. And Week 14 at the Lions, 23 fantasy points. So this week, a great matchup. Dallas back home. Minnesota, bend but don't break defense at times. Gives up the 3rd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And we know this Dallas Cowboy offense is one of the more high-powered offenses in the league, scoring about 30 points per game. So Aubrey, like I said, 60-plus yards. He makes it look easy. And this week versus the Minnesota Vikings, obviously he's an easy start. Once again, so that's a few kickers I would start for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.